Hey, what's up YouTube? It's Ratha Sochenda, and in this video, I'm gonna walk you through step by step on how to put together V2 version 2 of this universal tire carrier using the build kit that I've developed. And the build kit actually really came into fruition here on YouTube after making the first one for my 4Runner. And because of the level of interest and the feedback that I received over the past 3 to 4 months, I decided to take this into production with the help of you guys. So I just really want to say thank you so much for following along and supporting my work. So the goal with this new version was to actually make it easier to put together and make it that much better than before, so that even the most novice fabricator can actually put this together and have a well-designed and functional unit. So if some of you guys are interested in getting the build kit, make sure to click here or check the video description for the link. So this is the contents of the kit. All the pieces of steel, nuts, bolts, hardware, latch, everything you need to build version 2 of the universal tire carrier. Also, I want to note that as the making of this video, there are still some pieces that you still need to go out and purchase to make this all happen. And those are some of the longer steel tube pieces and the wheel studs or bolts that match your actual wheel. For the latest information on that, make sure to check out my website. I've actually created a resources page that will help navigate on what you'll need to complete the build. Besides that, everything else is included inside the build kit. All right, let's quickly go over some of the key items in the build kit. Let's start with the anti-wobble first. You can see here, there are 3 sets of holes cut out, and that's just to allow for flexibility because some vehicles, their pin lock is actually in different locations than other vehicles. So I cut out 3 holes to allow for adjustment when you insert this into your tow hitch. So that's pretty cool. Second, this is the hinge bracket. You now see it's all bent up in a one-piece bracket design. This is cut out on a CNC laser, so the accuracy and the quality is very good. And then third, let's talk about the wheel plate. You can see I got all these slots cut out on here. That's just to help with all the different popular wheel patterns that are available out there. Make sure to check my website to see which ones will work with this. And then you have this cutout here to help with the assembly process with other components. So some of the features and parts that are here have these key features to help with the assembly. And then last, we have the license plate frame. For forever, I couldn't find one. So now I have the means to actually design and make one in-house. So that's what I did. So you also get that too. And of course, you get all the hardware that comes included, such as the nuts, bolts, LEDs. And don't forget, you guys, with all this and with this video, you guys also get a digital download of the build plans. So make sure to download that and print that out to follow along when you're putting this together. But yeah, just quickly wanted to go over that and kind of show you some of the key things. Also, I wanted to talk a little bit about the finish of the steel pieces. You can see that these parts are super nice and clean. You can see that you have a nice clean edge and a nice clean finish because these parts actually go through a tumbler which cleans and deburrs the parts after they've been cut from my CNC plasma table and my bandsaw. So the benefit is it eliminates the needs to prep parts prior to welding and painting, and that in itself is a huge time saver. So when I designed this universal tire carrier, my main goal was to make it universal as possible, especially for those vehicles that didn't have a off-the-shelf option for their car. And to also make it take it on and off as you please, like a bike rack, and then stowed away. If you need more information on vehicle fitment, make sure to check out my website for more details. I've laid out some general guidelines on what's needed to make this work for your vehicle. However, I do know that there are some unique applications, so make sure to reach out to me and hopefully I can point you in the right direction. In order to keep this video somewhat reasonable in length, I'm going to split it into 3 parts and give you more information on what you're seeing here as I'm building it. All right, now with that all out of the way, let's jump into building this thing. So for the swing out, it's actually best to start building from the bottom and then work your way up. This actually starts with the anti-wobble system here. So if you purchase a kit, these are the components that actually come in the kit. You have your hardware, and then you have your tube, and then you have your two plates. So the first thing we're going to do is weld the bolt to the plate. There's two of them. We're actually going to use the smaller plate. It's going to go in like this. But before we do, we actually have to grind off all the cadmium plate that's on the hex of the bolt prior to welding. This is going to ensure a proper weld. So let's take that over to the belt grinder real quick and sand that off. So one way to jig this all up is to get your two tubes, and then you get your plate, slide the bolt in, and kind of rest that like that, and then you should be able to start welding this up. You can kind of see it. It's going to go in like this, but it doesn't sit 100% flush. So we'll just have to grind a little bit off the welds, so until it sits flush with the tube there. So let's take that over to the belt grinder or your flap disc and grind it off a little bit. So next, now that we have this all grinded down and it sits flush with this piece, we're going to take this whole assembly now and we're going to center it on top of the tube here. So let's get that all lined up real quick. And you want to also make sure that it's also perpendicular too, it's not slanted. So this here looks good, and we're going to clamp that down and weld it up. So after welding it up, you should have something like this here. If you try to throw it inside your tube, it's going to be a tight fit. So we'll just need to kind of shave off the edges because of the overflow of the weld. So we'll take that up to the belt grinder real quick and do that. To the belt grinder, you'll have something like this. You can see we just kind of shave the ends real quick so that it'll slide into the 2x2 tube. But we're going to let that cool real quick, and then once it's cooled, we're going to slide it into the 2x2 anti-wobble tube. So when you're installing this, and if it doesn't go in smoothly and you're trying to get it in, one thing to do is to just kind of rotate it, and you'll find the sweet spot. And you might have to just take a mallet, just hit this here. But essentially what you want to do is check to make sure it slides in and ends right over here at this half moon cutout here. So that's the alignment mark that I modeled in so that you don't have to do any measurement. You simply slide it in, it's flush, and that's where you're going to end up welding this guy to this tube. So here's another shot here. So we're going to take it, slide it in. See the opening right there, slide it in it till it's flush with that line, and that's where you're going to do your plug weld, here and on the other side. And then we'll for now we'll just tack that in. Another way to line it up too is to have it face up like this, and if you're able to clamp it down, you can clamp it down like so, just like that, and this will keep this guy flat against the inner tube, and then come from the side and do your tacks there and on the other side. So that's just another orientation that you can do as well. Before we move forward, we're going to take the wedge piece, and we're just going to do a dry fit just to make it slides over. Should be able to slide up and down without any friction. So if it's like that, we're good to go.
So the next thing is now to take the wedge, slide it over, and then you want to make this piece flush with this. So if your table is flat, you're going to be able to achieve that. You don't want it to be like up like this. You want it flat. You also put a 1, 2, 3 block just to make sure. And then you're also going to want to make sure it's flush on this side. And then you're going to get your other plate, and you can see that it's off-centered, and you want that piece to be like sitting like that. And here's a direct shot at it. So when you put this plate on, you see the hole where it's closest to the bottom. That's where you want to have it. You don't want to have it this way. So you want to go this way. And then you kind of want to do your best to center it. Get pretty close. And then you're going to want to tack that guy in. So I'm just going to put this plate here just to kind of keep it in. If you have magnets, great. Use magnets as well. So let's tack that in. Okay, so kind of wanted to show you how this works. You can see I just tacked that in for now. We'll end up welding that later in the video. So to show you how it works, get your flat washer, put your nut, and then so how this works is as you tighten the nut, the wobble wedge portion will slide up like that. And what that does is it pushes up against the inner walls of your tow hitch, creating tension, and that's what keeps this piece from rattling inside. Also, I want to mention we also want to weld this whole bottom piece here as well. That's not going to interfere with the anti-wobble wedge, so let's do that real quick to secure it even further. All right, now that we got this guy all tacked up, let's take it over to the factory tow hitch of the car real quick and do a quick dry fit to see how this all fits up. All right, so before we insert the anti-wobble system into the factory tow hitch, just make sure your nut is loose. We're gonna insert it like this, not like this, not upside down, but on the wedge portion up. So you can see we have 3 level adjustments. And this is my length of my factory tow hitch. And I'm going to show you which hole is going to be optimized best for my factory tow hitch. And here is the factory pin lock location for mine. So let's start with the first one. First set of holes. Put our pin lock inside. And you can see the entire anti-wobble wedge is inside the factory tow hitch. This is the best case scenario for your car. As much as the anti-wobble wedge is inside the factory tow hitch receiver, it's just going to give you a better, tighter fit. But if, let's say, that doesn't work for your car because your pin lock is a little bit further down, you may need to go to the second set of hole. And here, this also works with my car. You can see we have about, I would say, 3/8 of an inch of the wedge sticking out, and the majority of it is still inside the factory tow hitch receiver. So I still like that. And ideal for me, I would actually go with this setup because let's say I decide to take this universal tire carrier and put it on a different car. Now I'll have 2 sets of holes to allow for adjustment just in case that pin lock is different on the other car. So in this particular case, I would actually go with the second hole. That may not work for your car. You may need to go to the 3rd hole. So let's slide that in, and we'll put our pin lock in. And if, like I said, if the hole is tight, or if it's not going in through, you may just need to grind off a little bit, off the holes a little bit, shave it down a little bit. I made these holes super tight and tolerant just because I want a super nice fit with the pin lock. But let's go to that 3rd hole. So let's take a look underneath the car. And now you can see this wedge portion, you got about half of it sticking out. And for me, and in this particular case, this is a no-go. So for me, I would not go with the third hole for this car. You want as much of the wedge inside the factory tow hitch. So let's move that back to the second hole where I like it. And what we're gonna do now is snug this up. We're not gonna torque it down real tight just because everything is kind of loosely tacked in. And then we're going to make some marks on the actual anti-wobble to locate the next part of the assembly. All right, so if for some reason you're not able to slide the anti-wobble all the way through, I know some cars, they cap off the factory tow hitch. You're gonna have to drop that down and notch that cap off for you to slide this through. All right, so this is a 19 mil nut, and we're just gonna zap it in real quick just to keep this guy nice and snug. So I also wanted to note, as you're tightening this up, you want to push back on the anti-wobble. That's going to keep the pin lock super nice and tight when it comes to final installation. We're going to actually make some marks here. This is going to locate the auxiliary hitch onto this piece so that it doesn't interfere with the back of the reinforcement collar of the factory tow hitch. But before we do, I like to make sure that this guy is square with the tow hitch. So let's double check that. You can see it's slightly off, so we're gonna just give it a couple whacks, and we'll double check that side. And I'm using just my 1, 2, 3 block. Back that side a little bit. Yep, that looks good, and that looks good. All right, so the first mark I'm gonna make is back of the tow hitch that meets the anti-wobble. You could use a Sharpie or a scribe. In my case, I have a scribe. We're gonna mark that right there. And then we're gonna mark about 3/8 or 1/2 inch back. All right. So that second line that we have, that's where our auxiliary receiver is going to meet. All right, so from the second mark, you're gonna wanna measure about 3 to 4 inches back. In my case, I'm gonna do 3.5. So you can see when you have the collar and you have this piece and you weld it on there, this excess will be trimmed away. So that third mark that we have is where we're gonna do our miter cut or trim this excess off. So now that I have my 3 marks, I'm gonna take this over to the bandsaw and create that miter. You see we made our miter cut on the bandsaw, and we also cut a flat edge here so that we can get rid of that sharp edge. That's just gonna help with the weld up. All right, I just wanted to go over kind of the pre-assembly. So you have your auxiliary hitch. That second mark that we made on the anti-wobble, that's gonna slide up in line with to that. And you can see we have our reinforcement collar here. And you can see why we needed to notch it out is we needed to provide clearance for the reinforcement collar for the auxiliary hitch. All right, that's the pre-assembly mock-up of how it's gonna look like. So this setup is for the standard configuration. Let's quickly go over the low clearance situation. So that is mainly for cars that, like small compact cars like Subarus that have very little clearance from their lift gate. What ends up happening is they need to actually take the auxiliary hitch and slide it over and weld it in line with the anti-wobble. That's gonna drop it about 2 inches or so down so that the tailgate or the lift gate will clear. So that's the low clearance configuration. If you want to find more information on it, there'll be a page in the build plans that covers the low clearance and why you want to go low clearance versus the standard. But most vehicles, the standard configuration is going to work. All right, so this completes the anti-wobble portion. Next, we're going to move to the auxiliary hitch and how we're going to install that into the anti-wobble. But before we do, I just wanted to show you the two pieces that make up the auxiliary hitch. You have your reinforcement collar and you have this special tube. This tube is actually, the seam, inside seam is actually removed from the factory. This is to allow for 2x2s to go inside and slide through. Before we can install this into the anti-wobble system, we'll have to fully weld this collar in first. And you want to make sure that the collar is on the bottom side, closest to the hole. You don't want it over here, you want it over here. So let's jig that guy up real quick. Pretty much I have it flat down on the table and just like that. All right, we're gonna let that cool down real quick and we're gonna jig it up to this guy here. The next thing we're gonna do is install the auxiliary tube to the anti-wobble tube. And the auxiliary tube needs to be centered to the anti-wobble. For us to do that, we're gonna take our universal wheel plate from our build kit and use it as a spacer to space up the anti-wobble. All right, so now that we have the auxiliary centered with this guy, we wanna make sure that also we line the edge here to the second mark that we marked our anti-wobble with. First, just let me get this all clamped down real quick and I'll take the camera over and I'll show you how we line up that second mark. And one thing I also like to point out is inside the auxiliary, I like to actually have the seam side facing down or pretty much facing this way towards the anti-wobble. All right, just let me take the camera over to the other side and show you that it's aligned with that second line that we marked earlier. All right, I don't know if you can see this, but there's the first mark and here's the second mark. Let's get that nice and lined up real quick. All right, I like what I see there. And it's aligned there. And it's nice and square. Now that we have this all nice and jigged up, the auxiliary is centered with the anti-wobble. We're gonna lay some tacks on this, but we're gonna make sure we lay these tacks in specific locations because there are gonna be some other components that will fit up, and I want to make sure that those tacks don't get in the way. Let's take a quick look at it. Nice and centered, how we want it. Sitting nice and flat. All right, I think we're good. All right, now that we have this auxiliary tacked in place, let's do another quick test fit just to make sure it clears everything. All right, that's where it's gonna live. You can see we have about 2 inches of clearance away from the rear bumper, and we have this as close as we can to the tow hitch, and you have that 3/8 to 1/2 inch gap, which is going to allow for our weld bead to live without hitting the back of the factory tow hitch. So I wanted to actually show you guys what the next components are in the build. So you have your 45-degree offset tube and you have your backing plate. And how it goes in is something like that and sits like that. So here, this space in here, this is where your fixed arm for the swing arm is going to live. So you have about 2 inches away from the rear bumper. This is just my scenario, my setup. Now I do want to point out that some cars are a little bit different. My tow hitch is actually sticking out about 1 inch from the rear bumper here, this way. I know some cars, also some trucks actually, the tow hitch is actually flush with the rear bumper. So if that's the case, this is also a good place to just double check to make sure the clearances are good. In your case, when you make that second mark, this tow hitch might be all the way back here super flush. So when you put this guy in, you'll just want to make sure not only are you marking for your weld to live, but you're also marking for clearances on the rear bumper as well. So it has to clear, you know, all this here. So some cars, the tow hitch actually is a little bit more inwards towards the bumper, and it sits, you know, and the bumper sticks out further away. So when you go and install your anti-wobble system, you got to make sure that this guy, the auxiliary, also clears the rear bumper. So you may need to make that second mark a little bit further back to clear the rear bumper. So that's why, like I said, that's why we tack everything in place, just to make sure we're good on clearances. So just want to point that out before we move to the next component. All right, now we're gonna install the 45-degree offset tube that came with the kit and the rear backing plate as well. So how we're gonna do that is we're gonna get this guy here, turn it over, put it flat against the table, get your 1, 2, 3 block. And there's a few ways to do this. So for the 45-degree offset tube, it goes something like this. And you have your rear backing plate. So there are 2 ways to install this rear backing plate. You can install it on the back side, or you can install it on the front side. And the plans actually call it out to install on the back side, just for ease of assembly. But you lose about a 1/4 inch of clearance, meaning that the whole rear swing out sits a 1/4 inch away from the rear bumper. Now, if you're like me, I like everything super nice and compact. And so I like it to hug as much of the rear as I can. This way it narrows the gap between the rear tire carrier and the rear bumper. And I like that nice tight look, but you may not need that because maybe you're gonna install some accessories in the back. But in my case, I'm gonna install this on the front side. In order for me to do that, I gotta make sure that I put this in first, or it's not gonna work. So let's open up the jig back up. Let's slide this guy in first, like so. And then we're gonna put our 45-degree offset tube like so. So we're gonna actually shift this guy up a 1/4 inch because we wanna make sure that we have enough material to weld the bead around. And then this guy is gonna sit on top. First thing we're gonna do is get this guy nice and squared up with the auxiliary because I want this piece here to be as horizontal as possible. I don't want this to be leaning down like this because that whole swing arm is gonna swing or lean down. So I like to get the bent bracket that came with the kit, space it up like so. So I have my square flat against the side of the auxiliary here, and I'm checking for squareness. And you can see right here, there's a little bit of gap. So when I want to knock that smidge up like that and get that guy nice and square. So I don't know if you can see that. Square here and square here. So this way I know my swing arm is going to be nice and level versus tilting down or tilting up. All right, we're just going to move this backing plate out of the way real quick and lay a couple of tacks. And next we're going to tack in the backing plate as well. Yep, nice and squared. Yep. And you also want to make sure that this guy is sitting perpendicular. It's not tilted this way or this way. So if it is, make sure you fix that before moving forward. All right, I think I like where we're at, and we're gonna move over to the next step. So next, we're gonna figure out how to calculate the fixed arm length, and from there, we'll be also able to determine the swing arm length as well. I actually made a pretty in-depth video when I made version 1 of this tire carrier. It used a wood prototype to determine the lengths. I go in-depth in that particular video, so I'll leave a link somewhere up here where you can check that out for more information. Well, for now, I'm just going to quickly go over how I do it here on my 2004 4Runner. So what we'll need is a tape measure, and then we have our piece that we welded earlier installed on our hitch. And how I like to get the measurement is I measure the far left or the driver's side of the edge of the reinforcement collar on the auxiliary hitch. And then from there, I walk it over. So where the lift gate here meets the rear bumper, this open seam here is where I draw a line down. And from here, I calculate 28 inches, but your car may be different. So make sure you measure this carefully. And if it's your first time building this, I would go maybe 29 inches, just in case something happens, because it's easier to shorten it versus lengthen it. So if it's your first time, just make it a little bit longer. But for me, because I built a few for this car, I'm gonna make it an inch shorter because I know that measurement works, which is 27 inches. So 27 inches is right around here. But yeah, that's how you calculate the fixed arm length. All right, I already pre-cut these on my bands already, but these are your swing arm tubes. There's two of them. You have your longer one, which is the fixed arm. This is the one that's gonna sit in the back. And then you have your shorter one, which will swing open and close. The sizing on these tubes are listed on my website. They're 1.5 by 3 by 1/8 inch wall rectangular tubing. And to get the length of the swing arm tube, what you'll need to do is whatever measurement you have on the fixed arm, you want to subtract 2.625 or 2 inches and 5/8, and that will give you the measurement for your swing arm tube. Because I measured 27 inches for the fixed arm, my swing arm is going to be 24 3/8, so 24.375. So that's going to be like I said, that's going to be 2.65 shorter than your fixed arm. So those are my two measurements. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get our DOM tube from our hinge bracket assembly, and we're going to notch a spot for it to live on the swing out arm. And you can see on this particular tube, there's a seam side, and I like to have that on the back side, so I'm not looking at it. Same thing with the fixed arm tube. There's this seam here, and that's also going to be facing back. So this is going to be facing the rear bumper, and that's going to be like this. So when I open it, I don't see those seams, and that's just a preference thing for me. I think it just looks cleaner that way. All right, let's mark where this guy needs to live. All right, so what I like to do first is, in order for us to locate how far this needs to be inwards, we're going to get our measurement, which is 1/4 inch, and then we're going to mark 1/4 inch here, and then also 1/4 inch on the bottom side. So I'm going to mark this curve is I'm going to lay my fixed arm tube flat, and then I'll be able to square this guy up and then and trace the edge of the DOM tube and get that nice arc on both sides. So let's make sure that this guy is also squared. I'm going to mark my scribe, and that's going to give me my curve. Then I'm going to flip it over and do the other side. So you can see there's a arc right there that we traced from the DOM, and we have one on the bottom side. And we're gonna notch that out real quick with the angle grinder. All right, so we're just gonna get an angle grinder with the cutoff wheel and make a series of serrations on the top and on the bottom. And then we're gonna get a flap disc and just smooth that all out. And because I got a die grinder with a deburr bit, I'm gonna use that and clean that up. Just have more control, but you can also use a flap disc to do that as well. So, all right, we'll just do a test fit up like this. It doesn't have to be perfect because once we get it jigged up, we'll make sure that this guy is squared and sitting flat against the tube. the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take this DOM tube and have it centered and square with this swing arm tube. So in order to do that, we'll grab our wheel plate and we'll grab our other plate that comes in the kit, which is these both are 1/4 inch thick, and we're gonna slide that under and slide this over, and want to make sure that this is also centered with the tube as well and square. You don't want it to be like this or like this, nice and squared, and you don't want it to be offset up and down. You want it to be right in the center. Okay, that's nice and squared, and let's make sure it's centered. All right, that's pretty square to me.
And with all that, we have reached the end of the first part of this build. And in part 2, I'll be putting together these parts of the build. And if you don't want to miss that, you might want to consider subscribing to the channel. Also, if you want to see a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that goes on with the tire carrier build, make sure to follow me on Instagram at ratha.sochenda. Again, thank you guys so much for the support. If you guys want the build plans, the build kit, or some of the components of the build kit, please make sure to check out my website for more information. As always, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, and thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in part 2.